As a Day 1 agent in Tom Clancy's The Division, I have been a part of this tumultuous adventure for over a year and a half, and as it seems that my beloved game is nearing its life cycle, I decided to give this flawed masterpiece a thorough review and touch on what I felt went well and what did not. As in all of my reviews, I plan on not only offering up constructive criticisms for poor design choices or implementations of said choices, but alternatives to better enhance the overall build concept for this title. What's going on, agents? It's LtBuzzLitebeer, and today is episode 2 of my The Division Revisions video series, and I will be covering the controversial topic of PvP. Now, since I do not know what Ubisoft has in store for The Division's future, I wanted to get my ideas out for everybody within the community to see and contribute to, in the hopes that it can be used as a building block to create a more complete and better functioning version of itself. So, without wasting any further time, let's get right into this review. I know many of you think of me as a PvE-only player, and you could not be further from the truth. My background with online shooters stretches as far back as Modern Warfare 2 on PS3, and I have spent countless hours in the Battlefield franchises including 3 and 4, along with many an hour within Destiny's Iron Banner. Point being, I have a passion for online shooters and actually prefer PvP to PvE for its unpredictable gameplay and challenge of battling other players versus predictable AI. With that being said, let's jump into The Division, PvP, and the Dark Zone. I'm going to come right out and say that I have liked the concept of the Dark Zone since beginning play in The Division last March 2016. This lawless environment takes the standard gameplay mechanics of farming NPCs that all players are used to in The Division and adds in the element of possible PvP, and it is this constant possibility of being attacked by other players that adds tension, uncertainty, and activates the human response of fight or flight when faced with combat. Now, there are no missions or clearly laid out objectives when entering the Dark Zone, and the mission itself really boils down to surviving the environment of the DZ and, of course, extracting gear. All of this I really love about the DZ, but there are many aspects to the PvP portion of the game that weren't thoroughly thought through or were incorrectly programmed, starting off with what I felt is the biggest issue with PvP in the Dark Zone, and it is the clash of how The Division is marketed versus what it truly is. The Division is marketed as a cover-based shooter, but there is nothing cover-based about standing in a big group of other agents wiggling around erratically while popping heals and signature skills, all while hip-firing down your opponents. PvP places too much importance on a player's build and ability to exploit broken in-game mechanics in order to win a gunfight. Tactical approaches to tracking down and eliminating other players are thrown out the window in favor of group circle jerks with players swarming around like angry hornets, spamming nades, dropping shock turrets, dancing around to the chicken dance, all while dropping F-bombs at the other players and accusing them of hacking. Where is the tactical portion or cover-based shooter mechanics involved in this type of PvP? Now, to answer that, we're going to need to break down how PvP is approached in The Division and how overly complicated and broken its core mechanics truly are. The first issue with the mechanics of PvP that I would like to touch on is time to kill and how it adversely affects the PvP experience. I come from FPS games like Battlefield, where the TTK is extremely short and players are severely punished for making critical tactical errors. It is through these quick deaths that a player learns the ins and outs of the laws of combat, and over time will learn to take a more cerebral approach to tactics and movements. In my opinion, the Division TTK is far too long and forgiving, and players are able to approach PvP with what feels like unlimited amounts of toughness and are not severely punished for breaking cover and entering the fray unprotected. It is this seemingly unlimited amount of protection from incoming damage, including armor, health, damage mitigation through the proccing of talents, and overlapping of builds and player skill selections that really gets in the way of tactical cover-based PvP. If we were able to strip this all away and really focus on gunplay and tactical cover-based shooting with a TTK that was much faster than what we have right now, it would force players to think more in combat, learn from their mistakes, and would virtually eliminate everything wrong with the core gameplay mechanics of PvP and the DZ. And while we are on the subject of time to kill and core gameplay mechanics, the exploit of performing the chicken dance and confusing the servers as to your actual location really needs to be addressed. Players are looking for a smoothly functioning PvP environment, and when your servers are unable to keep up with the player's movement while they rapidly wiggle back and forth, it truly breaks down the trust a player has in the development team's ability to deliver on a fair and fully functioning PvP arena. How this game-breaking movement mechanic exploit was not discovered by the QC teams prior to launch, and how it has been allowed to stay hard-coded into the game for this long is beyond me. But when a player can rapidly strafe and dance side to side, confusing the servers to their actual location and completely evade an entire squad that is firing full auto at their position, it is a mechanic that is truly detrimental to the overall PvP experience and should have been addressed from as far back as the beta. Now, I'm not a programmer, but the answer seems to be either to limit the player rotational movement speeds to something a bit more natural and therefore limit the player's ability to rapidly switch directions, or to completely overhaul the movement mechanics and how it syncs with the servers so that where a player is seen on screen is truly where they are in relation to where the server perceives them to be. Having massive desync issues in PvP is something that is truly frustrating and has driven many players away from PvP. Quickly jumping back to servers and how they function, you need to know how players are placed on servers for PvE and PvP and how they differ. If you watched episode 1 of this Division Revision series, I covered in detail how PvE players are each independently segregated onto their very own PvE server, and only through using the matchmaker will you ever be able to join another player's PvE server for tackling missions, incursions, or roaming the open world together. The Dark Zone works completely different in that upon entering the Dark Zone, players are placed into populated DZ-only servers that are shared by other players. As players are placed into servers, the server begins to receive a higher workload, and if somebody is connected to your server that has subpar internet, everybody's gameplay starts to suffer when they begin to experience lag, which includes teleporting NPCs and agents, delayed skill procs, and overall degraded gameplay experiences. On PC, I can usually tell when one of these players has joined my DZ server, as I will go from liquidy smooth gameplay to all of a sudden start experiencing frame rate drops and stuttering. When playing on my PS4, DZ server lag is more pronounced and can lead to players experiencing game-breaking anomalies while in combat, including players teleporting violently from location to location, players stuck in place and then suddenly moving to a further location, players taking large amounts of incoming rounds while sustaining no damage at all, other players sliding around on the floor instead of moving their legs, and a whole host of other issues that can really frustrate the hardcore PvP enthusiast. Once again, players are looking for a smooth and efficiently run PvP arena, and when you cannot consistently deliver that experience to them, they either will begin to mistrust the gaming experience and will blame these anomalies on outside factors like hacks and lag switches, or they will completely abandon this portion of the game or stop playing the game entirely due to this lack of trust in the product. Now clearly, some sort of regional filter system needs to be installed that determines a player's ping rating, even on consoles, and places players with similar ping ratings onto servers in their regions. Nobody likes trying to shoot at a rapidly teleporting player that seems to have been connected to your DZ server from the far side of the moon. If a player is found to have subpar internet with too high a ping rating, then perhaps they shouldn't be allowed to either A, join that server at all, or B, perhaps not be allowed to PvP until they have the necessary ping rating to effectively participate. Many of my issues with PvP in the Dark Zone were centered around how players went rogue and all of the accidental rogue issues, but these will be addressed once Update 1.8 goes live with the new Rogue 2.0 mechanics. Players will no longer receive friendly fire accidental rogue 20-second timers when battling rogue parties, and I really like the new mechanic of how when somebody in the party goes rogue, you must either choose to join them or leave the party. This will eliminate non-rogue party members weaving back and forth in front of their rogue teammates in an attempt to trigger other players going rogue, and the total fuckfest disaster this type of gameplay led to. However, since the Rogue 2.0 mechanics will address so many issues for PvP, I would like to add one item to that list, and it has to do with grenade spam. Now, in most online shooters, players receive a couple of grenades each time they die and respawn, and it forces a player to use them wisely, as once they are activated and used, they will receive no more until they die again. Now, in contrast, the Division awards players with a huge amount of grenades and allows them to spam at will, and it really detracts from the overall core PvP experience. The grenades themselves are not overly damaging, especially if a player has invested a bit into exotic damage resilience, but it is the stagger that needs to be addressed. When rogue and attempting to defend oneself, attacking non-rogue agents can simply stagger the rogue into submission as they are unable to flee or defend themselves. My alternatives would be to either limit the number of grenades a player can carry and therefore force them to use them more wisely, or to look into the overwhelming stagger mechanics when in the blast radius of a grenade and pull them back so that a player can at least have the ability to defend themselves. Many of the known issues such as multi-grouping and battle buddy meat shields will be addressed in Rogue 2.0. But the last issue that I would like to see addressed with PvP in the Dark Zone is checkpoint camping. Now, many agents want to engage in good-natured PvP, but they can't even make it out of the checkpoints as the rogue party is camping 10 feet away with turrets, grenades, and weapons trained straight on the doorways, and they are simply melted as soon as they enter the Dark Zone, and this has been an issue since the release of the Division. There has to be some way of installing a protective zone, almost a protective halo around checkpoint entrances, so that players who are attempting to enter the DZ can do so without being blown to bits the moment they enter. Now, I don't think installing turrets around entry points to be the answer, but perhaps there can be an area around the entrances that provides protection from incoming damage and disables weapons from working. Or, instead of checkpoint entrances, perhaps allow players to spawn into DZ safe houses. But you once again will need to provide the protective halo areas around these spawn locations in order to give spawning agents needed protection to enter the DZ. Now, as far as the mechanics of the Dark Zone and the potential for getting completely blindsided by rogue agents as they attempt to steal your extraction or just completely jump you while you are engaged in combat with the NPCs, that's just how the DZ is configured, and you need to go in there knowing what to expect. Make sure you constantly check behind you, check your radar, and look for clues as to the proximity of other agents. If you are running around your normal DZ farming route and keep noticing that caches have been opened and NPCs are not where you normally see them, then chances are an agent or group of agents are roaming around in your area and you need to take extra precautions. Use the sounds around you, listen for explosions or footsteps, and learn the routes in and out of each section of the DZ to avoid being caught in a dead end. And finally, always, and I mean always, assume that every agent you come across in the Dark Zone is there to take part in PvP, and will do so when the opportunity benefits them. At this point, I feel that I have discussed the DZ enough, and I apologize if I have missed any important topics, but in the interest of time, let's now move on to the Last Stand game mode, which was introduced in Update 1.6. Designed to finally bring a structured, objective-based PvP mode to the Division, Last Stand was launched in February 2017, and on many fronts, it did just what it was designed to do. However, there were and are flaws within this game mode that need to be addressed either in this Division or for a sequel. Firstly is the size of the maps, and just how much travel time is needed to actually arrive at the combat areas. Using huge cross-sections of the existing DZ, Last Stand maps are far too big for 8 vs 8 PvP, and there is far too much wasted space and time spent running to the normal combat area situated around Objective Bravo. In addition, Once killed, and if buddy spawn has not been activated, players will spend even more time running from one of the forward spawn locations back to the combat area. This really slows down the flow of combat, and if you get killed several times in quick succession, you lose all feeling of PvP and quickly reach high levels of frustration and boredom, continually running back to the combat zones. My suggestion would be to cut the overall map sizes for Last Stand roughly in half in an attempt to speed up the pacing of the actual PvP combat. In addition, I would like to see the buddy spawn system activated from the very beginning of the match so that a coordinated squad can consistently stay together and working to secure the objectives. Next, and probably the most glaring issue with Last Stand, is the way an enemy player or squad of players can completely ignore the objectives and run straight across the map and spawn camp the other team's home objective and essentially trap them in their own spawn with no chance of a fair fight. How this exploit was not seen in testing is once again beyond me, but it is truly game-breaking and it needs to be addressed as soon as possible. Objective-based games always provide a zone of protection around each team's home spawn areas to avoid the other team being able to literally stand right next to their preset spawn locations and utterly destroy them once they enter the map. Last Stand offers no such area of protection, and this has been needed since February of this year. Now, my suggestion is that each team has an out-of-bounds area around their home spawn where another player cannot enter to allow for each team to have at least a small portion of immunity once spawning in. This area will shield the home team from incoming fire and will in turn not allow spawning players to stay within it and fire back at the enemy team. It will simply allow for a bit of protection to safely spawn and then either begin moving towards an objective or begin fighting your way out of your spawn. My final suggestions for Last Stand are really minor, since I've already touched on my two biggest issues being map size and spawn camping. However, I would like to see small things like individual servers for solo players instead of being grouped into Last Stand servers versus full coordinated 4-man squads. There are stability and lag issues when grouped up with players from out of region, and I would like the possibility of having a PvP only Last Stand server versus what we have now with the forced PvE elements. Now, I know that Skirmish will be coming in update 1.8, but remember this is not objective based and will be more along the lines of traditional team deathmatch. Instead, the dev team could cut the map sizes by half in Last Stand, remove the NPCs, and allow for a more intense 8 versus 8 domination style game mode. And finally, I would like to see a gunplay only game mode that reduces a player's armor to 0, disables all skills and talents, and allows players to PvP straight up without all of the other items, kind of like hardcore. It would allow for a few grenades and medkits, but nothing else. This could really promote some tactical-based objective gameplay, and I for one would like to be able to strip down PvP and get back to the basics of gunplay, firing angles, and using cover. Well, there you go, agents. Most of what I like and dislike about PvP for both the DZ and Last Stand game modes, and I am sure that I have forgotten some important topics and would appreciate it if you could leave your thoughts in the comment section below. In addition, if you could take the time to rate the video with a huge thumbs up, it would be greatly appreciated. If you want some more LtBuzzLitebeer in your lives, make sure to pound that sub button and follow me on Twitter at LtBuzzLitebeer. And remember, from my channel, likes, comments, subs are loved. Until my next The Division video, this has been LtBuzzLitebeer saying peace out.